This video is brought to you by Mack Weldon, which is selling some of the most comfortable clothing on the market. We'll hear more about that later in the video. Back in the 90s, superhero films were becoming, not very good. One of the most classic series at the time was Batman, of course, and towards the end of its life cycle, the films really started to just become jokes in and of themselves. But there may have been one cancelled film that could have saved the series. Unfortunately, that movie was the sequel to Batman and Robin, but hear me out though. I've been studying this movie for a while now, and together we're going to learn as much as we can about it, and whether or not it could have saved the genre that was already gasping for air, or if it finally just put it down until its revival in the mid-2000s. So without further ado, let's talk about Batman Triumphant and what led to the film being cancelled. So let's go back to the year 1997. Superhero films are still coming out left and right. Classics like Batman Returns, Blade, Spawn, Spy Kids 3D. Audience members were saying that it was becoming a dying genre with its best movies behind them, but movie studios were still not convinced. Let's take a look at one movie studio in particular. Warner Brothers was getting ready for their next installment into the Batman franchise. The upcoming Batman and Robin film was set to come out that year. Warner Brothers were dancing in their piles of money, audience members were getting ready to buy their tickets, bat nipples were erect. It's safe to say that everybody was getting ready for the next installment into the franchise. They were actually so confident in their new film that they were already planning for the next installment. Before Batman and Robin had come out, Warner Brothers was hoping that Schumacher would come back and direct his third Batman movie, which would also be the fifth one in the franchise overall. Schumacher agreed, but stated that this would be his last Batman film, at least for a time. He wanted to continue the universe, but he needed a break after the next installment. So once our director was in it, it was time to start working on the casting and the outline of the new Batman film that would later be known as Batman Triumphant. Schumacher and the studio had some work to do. It was time to gather up the cast and crew for one last ride before giving Batman a break. The first person they went to was Akiva Goldsman, who we've actually talked about in the show multiple times. He was immediately asked if he wanted to join in on the crew and write the script for Batman Triumphant, since he wrote both Batman and Robin and Batman Forever. If you can count on any scriptwriter, it was Goldsman. Goldsman immediately goes, "No, please, please don't make me do this again. I really don't want to. Please, no." And then he ran like the wind, which made a great start for Triumphant. The studio was surprised, but needed another scriptwriter. Mark Protosevich, who I'll just call Mark, was then brought on to write the script instead. After a while, Mark came back with a draft called Batman Unchained, which later became known as Batman Triumphant. Batman Unchained was actually what the movie was called for a lot of production, but over time it just became known as Triumphant. People usually call it either or, since it never really got a finalized title. With the script done, the studio then got all of the main actors and actresses to return. Batman, Batgirl, Robin, Blu-ray Alfred, etc. But the script had some roles to fit for villains, and not just one, and no, not two, but 3 villains. A magic number that always works out. In the script, Mark wanted the main villain to be Scarecrow, with the Joker returning as a backup character. The Joker would not only return as his evil self, but with a third villain, his daughter Harley Quinn. And no, they're not together in this movie, okay? So get that weird Game of Thrones shit out of your head. But speaking of weird, let's talk a little bit more about this casting, cause it is, oh man. In a June 2015 interview with The Hollywood Reporter, Schumacher recalled who he wanted casted as Scarecrow. It was going to be very dark. I remember going to the set of Face Off and asking Nicolas Cage to play the Scarecrow. Nicolas Cage eventually agreed. You could argue that this is horribly miscast, or you could argue that Nicolas Cage is literally just Scarecrow in real life, so it all just works out. Up to you really. And although it was never officially confirmed, potential castings that were considered for Harley Quinn were Madonna and Courtney Love. Also, I haven't found much information on whether or not the bat nipples are returning, but I'm currently sending many handwritten letters to Warner Brothers asking for more information, so I'll keep you guys posted. So, production of the film is getting interesting, but before I can elaborate on all of the villains, we need to go over the entire story of Batman Triumphant. I'd like to mention right off the bat that the script for this film is not out and about on the internet or anything. Maybe in the future we'll get a leak, but right now all we're working with is what Schumacher the director has said and what Mark the writer have said. So with that said, let's get straight into the plot of Batman Triumphant. From the start, we would have seen a rift forming between Batman and Robin again. Almost immediately, Robin abandons Batman and goes off and does his own thing. Whether that means Nightwing or not, we're not sure. But Bruce Wayne is basically left on his own. With Robin gone, we explore a lot of Bruce Wayne's fears. These demons would have included the entire legacy of the Joker. Bruce Wayne keeps on seeing visions of the Joker haunting him in his nightmares and in his daily life. Almost like how Arkham Knight handled the Joker, with his consciousness just constantly with him. The death of Joker, Penguin, Two-Face, etc. have been really catching up to Batman and have been haunting him. Batman would be hallucinating an entire trial sequence where the law finally catches up to him for his killings, sentencing Batman to death for the many criminals that he's killed. Even though Batman never murdered those guys in cold blood per se, they were kind of all accidents, you know, he never just glocked their ass, but they all died as a result of fighting him, leading to constant guilt in Batman's mind. It all comes to life when Harley Quinn, who would have been reimagined as a toy maker, finds out that the Joker is her father. When Harley Quinn finds out, she realizes that she needs to finish what the Joker started, thus starting her goal to kill the Batman for good. After this, we cut over to the Scarecrow, played by Nicolas Cage of course. He would have actually had a personal vendetta against Bruce Wayne over business affairs, not Batman. Scarecrow does some investigating and eventually finds out his true identity. He then decides the easiest way to break the Batman would be to exploit his fears. Just like Batman Begins, he invents the toxic fear gas and eventually gets it to work. Scarecrow soon meets Harley Quinn and they immediately hit it off. They both decide that their target's the same, so they'll go together, teamed up, to kill the Batman. Scarecrow eventually explains his plans to Harley of how he wants to deal with the Batman. He doesn't want to kill him, he just wants him to suffer. He explains that his plan is to use the fear toxin to turn Bat's already breaking mind to go full crazy. Eventually the police would lock him up in Arkham Asylum once Batman had gone insane, putting him in the place that he's most vulnerable. Of course, Harley Quinn is super down because she's a crazy fuck, and this all leads to the climax of the film, and arguably what would have been the most expensive scene in movie history. Batman would eventually end up face to face with Scarecrow and Harley. Scarecrow then releases the fear toxin to get a direct hit on Bats. As he opens his eyes back up, he sees not only Scarecrow and Harley, but he sees Danny DeVito as the Penguin, Michelle Pfeiffer as Catwoman, Tommy Lee Jones as Two-Face, Jim Carrey as the Riddler, and finally Jack Nicholson as the Joker. Batman, not knowing what is real, then fights the Riddler, Two-Face, Scarecrow, Harley Quinn, Catwoman, the Penguin, and the Joker at the same time. Eventually, Batman is absolutely beat down and driven crazy by his past villains. But just in time, Robin comes back to bring Batman to his senses and end the Scarecrow's toxin. Back together again, Robin and Batman defeat Harley and the Scarecrow, and they end their reign of terror on Batman's conscience, thus ridding the guilt of the past villains. At the end of the movie, Bruce would have flown to Bali and found a cave full of bats. By standing up in the cave and allowing the bats to swarm around him, Bruce would prove that he had conquered his fears following the showdown with Scarecrow. And as we see Batman surrounded by something that he no longer fears, Batman Triumphant cuts to black, and thus was the end of the 90s Batman era. Of course, in the end, Batman Triumphant never happened, and the 90s Batman era ended with a whimper that was Batman and Robin, which of course is a huge reason why this film never happened. If we go back to 1997, Warner Brothers was pretty confident in Batman and Robin, until it released. As soon as it came out, it was panned by every viewer alike. Understandably, the Warner Brothers executives freaked out. Obviously, they let this Batman series have too much free reign. As scriptwriter Mark was working on the film, the executives demanded that they received a copy of Batman Triumphant. Of course, the script wasn't fully finished, but he had the general draft ready. Schumacher hadn't even had a chance to read the story yet, but Mark did just what he was told. He handed the script over to Warner Brothers, who were worried about the franchise, and, well, I'll let scriptwriter Mark himself explain what happened in the end. A few days later, I'm getting a call from Joel Schumacher, whose main comment was that I had maybe written the most expensive movie ever made with that last scene. Then I remembered that I never heard from the executive at Warner Brothers. I called many times, never got any kind of response. This got into a period of weeks, and then a month, and my agent pestering Warners, and the next thing I knew, they were pulling the plug on the whole project. They were going to wait and see what they were going to do with Batman. The Joel Schumacher-driven Batman train was taken off the rails. And that was it. Batman Triumphant was dead. We would never receive an official end to the 90s Batman era. They would need to spend around $100 million for a ton of A-list actors to come back for one scene. And since Batman and Robin flopped, they could never risk something so expensive. So per usual, I've put a poll up in the top right hand corner asking whether or not you guys would have liked to have seen this movie. For me, it definitely has the possibility of being good, but in the end it's still made by the same team behind Batman and Robin. So even if your general story is good, the awkward late 90s Batman crew is still there making decisions. It was for the best to shelve Batman and give the audience a break. Giving Batman a break while also getting an entirely new crew for the next film years later would give a much needed revamp to the character. So although it may have been interesting, maybe getting rid of Batman Triumphant was for the best. I'd also like to thank Mack Weldon for sponsoring this video. I actually contacted Mack Weldon for this because I do actually really enjoy their clothing, whether it's t-shirts, shorts, or for me, I got portions of their running gear. I mostly just use it for the times that I can get my ass up from playing Overwatch and actually go for a run. But I do genuinely love the clothes, and you can visit mackweldon.com and use the promo code Cutshort for 20% off. Plus, if you don't like it, you can just get a full refund, which is super cool. There's really nothing to lose here. By using the code, you help out the channel, and you help out the company that's willing to sponsor us, and you got nothing to lose. And so far, I'm loving Mack Weldon. It's great, and they really do have any piece of clothing you could want, and holy hell, it's comfortable. So again, use the code Cutshort for 20% off to help out the channel and yourself. And of course, I'd always like to thank our current Patreon donators, Nathan Franks, Roberto Martinez, Samantha Crawford, Jesse White, James Fitzpatrick, Callum Knight, and Just Jose. Big thanks to those guys for helping out the show, and if you want to help out Cutshort too, you can look into Patreon and see if you want to help out. But again, of course, thank you for watching Cutshort.
I know you gotta make your runs, but man, spend some time with your daughter or your son. Take a day or two to show them some fun. Play your part as a dad. Be responsible for what they become. Cause maybe that long talk, firm hug, and that laugh will help your kid read fluently and better at math. It's gonna take more than just the school staff to prepare them for the struggle that awaits in their path. It takes love. Come on, you want the cars and the raw chains, but you don't thank the Lord above for the small things. The food in your fridge, your girl or your